Don't. Someone might see. But the rancher did it anyway. And the whole town lost their minds. Henry Lawson had always been a man of quiet habits. The people of the small town he lived near knew him as someone who kept to himself. He wasn't unfriendly, but he had a way of moving through life without needing to explain himself to anyone. His ranch was on the edge of town, stretching across acres of open land, dotted with rolling hills and fields where the grass swayed gently in the wind. Many townspeople often wondered what Henry did all day. They saw him leave early in the morning, riding his old horse, and return only when the sun was low in the sky. But no one ever really knew what went on behind the tall wooden fences of his property. The town itself was small, the kind where everyone knew each other's business, or at least thought they did. People greeted each other with a nod or a wave, and news traveled quickly. Rumors could begin over a simple cup of coffee in the diner, or a conversation on the front porch of someone's house. But Henry seemed immune to all of it. He moved through the town in the mornings, buying his supplies or collecting mail, yet he never lingered to chat. There was something about him that made people respect his privacy, even as curiosity about him grew. Henry's ranch was his sanctuary. It had everything a man could want. A sturdy old barn, a small pond where ducks often gathered, and pastures that stretched out towards the horizon. But there was one part of the land that no one ever saw. Hidden behind a thick row of trees and a slight hill, there was a grove that seemed to belong to another world entirely. Birds nested there. Wildflowers bloomed in colors brighter than anywhere else on the property, and a small, clear stream trickled through the center. It was in this hidden grove that Henry spent the majority of his time, though the townspeople didn't know it. He glances around in despair. Thompson, who lived a mile down the road, noticed strange lights flickering in the distance.
"I swear I saw it moving," she said to her husband over dinner.
Something big, and it didn't look like any farm equipment. The story spread quickly, as it always did in a town like theirs. By the next morning, half the people in town had their own theory. Some thought it might be a new invention, others guessed it was a kind of wild animal nobody had seen before, and a few were convinced that Henry had gone completely mad. But Henry knew exactly what he was doing. He had a project, a secret he had been working on for months. It was not something ordinary, and he understood why the town would never approve of it. But still, he couldn't stop. Every morning he rose before the sun and walked the path to the grove. He would carry his tools, measuring devices and notebooks, moving carefully so as not to disturb the natural beauty around him. The grove was alive with colors and sounds, and Henry felt a kind of peace there that he never experienced anywhere else. Inside the grove, Henry had begun to build something extraordinary. It was not a barn, not a fence, not a silo, things that the townspeople were used to seeing. It was something entirely different, something that challenged his own skills and imagination. He sketched plans meticulously, worked with his hands, and sometimes stayed so late into the evening that the light of the moon was the only thing guiding him. It was exhausting work, but it was also exhilarating. With each passing day, the project grew more impressive, more intricate, more alive. Henry couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and fear at the same time. Despite his carefulness, people began to notice small hints of activity. Children dared each other to sneak up close to the fence, peeking through the gaps to catch a glimpse of what was going on. A few bolder adults tried to spy from the hills, but Henry always seemed one step ahead. He had learned the land like the back of his hand, knowing exactly where to place shadows and obstacles so that no one could see him. It was almost like a game, and he found himself both amused and determined not to be discovered. Henry's solitude also allowed him to think deeply. He considered what it meant to do something purely for oneself, without seeking approval or validation. The town valued conformity, routine, and the familiar. People liked things to stay the way they were. Henry, however, felt restless. He wanted to create something that was his alone, something that might not be understood immediately, but would be meaningful to him. The secret project became more than just a task. It became a part of his identity, a reflection of his courage and imagination. Yet the more Henry worked, the more the rumors grew. By midsummer, there were stories about the noises at night, the clang of tools, the shuffle of heavy objects, the soft hum of something electrical. Some claimed to have seen shadows moving behind the trees, far too large to be a person. The townspeople began whispering about what Henry might be up to. Some were worried, imagining accidents or mischief. Others were excited by the mystery, telling each other that something incredible was coming. Everyone agreed on one thing. Whatever Henry was doing, it was unusual, it was secretive, and it was unlike anything the town had seen before. Even as the town speculated, Henry continued his work undisturbed. He had a routine that no one could break. He rose early, ate a simple breakfast, and walked to the grove. There, he would spend hours planning, adjusting, and shaping his creation. The sun would rise high in the sky, casting its light on the leaves and the stream, and Henry would pause sometimes just to watch the natural world around him. The birds, the wind in the trees, the reflections on the water. They all seemed to encourage him, reminding him that creation, in any form, was a beautiful thing. But not everyone was happy about Henry's secrecy. A neighbor, Mr. Coleman, once tried to confront him. "Henry, what are you doing back there?" he asked politely but with a hint of concern. "We hear noises at night."
"We see lights. The children are curious, and honestly, some of us are worried."
Henry smiled kindly, but did not explain. "Some things are best kept private," he replied. I promise I am careful. Nothing will happen that would hurt anyone." Coleman left, still uneasy but unable to argue further. Henry had a way of speaking that made people hesitate, a calm authority that demanded respect. Despite the warnings and whispers, Henry continued his work. He knew that the town might never understand, might never approve, but he also knew that this was a moment in his life he could not waste. The project was more than wood, metal, or stone. It was a dream given shape. And for the first time in years, Henry felt truly alive, driven by a purpose that was entirely his own. As the weeks passed, the town became increasingly aware of the mystery. People would gather at the diner or the general store, sharing stories and speculations. But "I heard he's building a statue," someone would say. No, it's some kind of machine," another would reply. The children dared each other to sneak closer to see for themselves, their imaginations running wild. The tension and curiosity grew, though Henry remained calm, focused on his work, unaffected by the growing attention. At night, the ranch was quiet except for the sounds of Henry working in the grove. The moonlight shone through the leaves, casting shadows that danced across the grass. Sometimes Henry would pause to look up at the sky, feeling the vastness of the world and his small but meaningful place within it. He knew that the day of the reveal, when the town would finally see what he had been doing, might bring laughter, shock, or even criticism. But he had accepted that possibility long ago. This creation was not for the town. It was for himself, and for the proof that courage and imagination could thrive even in the quietest corners of the world. By the end of summer, the project was taking shape. Patient, though still hidden, it had grown large and detailed, impressive in ways that even Henry sometimes stopped to admire. He moved carefully, knowing that one careless moment could reveal everything prematurely. The townspeople's curiosity reached a peak, but Henry's determination never wavered. He worked silently, confidently, and with a sense of joy that only creation can bring. Narration. In those days, the ranch became more than land, it became a sanctuary of possibility. Henry, a quiet man in a small town, had taken a risk, followed his instincts, and created something extraordinary. And, though no one yet knew the full story, the whispers, the rumors, and the secretive movements around the ranch set the stage for an event that would soon leave the entire town amazed, confused, and forever changed. Henry's life, simple and quiet as it seemed, was now alive with purpose and anticipation. The mystery, the secrecy, and the quiet determination of one man had begun to stir the imaginations of an entire town, even if they didn't yet know what to expect. And as Henry looked out over the fields from his porch one evening, he allowed himself a small, knowing smile. The story was only beginning. Beret. Henry Lawson had always known that the town would never understand him. The people there liked things to stay simple and predictable, where everyone followed the same routines and life unfolded in the usual quiet way. But Henry was different. He had a vision, a project that no one could see yet, and he was determined to bring it to life. He knew that once the town found out what he was doing, there would be shock, gossip, and perhaps even anger. But he didn't care. The work had to be done, no matter what anyone thought. One afternoon, as the sun hung high in the sky and the fields shimmered with heat, Henry's neighbor, Mr. Coleman, came riding up the dirt road in his old truck. Coleman had been one of the few brave enough to try to talk to Henry about the strange happenings on the ranch. Now his expression was serious, his brow furrowed with concern. "Henry," he said, stepping out of the truck and brushing dust from his sleeves, "I need to ask you again, what is going on back there? People are talking, children are sneaking around, and honestly it worries me." Henry smiled gently, the calm that everyone knew him for shining through his eyes. "Coleman," he said, "I appreciate your concern, but I assure you, everything I'm doing is safe. Nothing will harm anyone." He paused, his gaze drifting toward the grove hidden behind the trees. "Some things are meant to be done quietly. Some things are meant to be kept to yourself, at least for a while." "I get that, Henry. I really do."
But people are saying all kinds of things now. What if he's building something dangerous? They ask.
"But what if it falls apart? What if it's some kind of machine that could hurt us?" His voice grew softer, almost pleading. "I'm not trying to be a bother, but maybe you should slow down." Beration. "Wait until things calm down in the town." Henry laughed softly, a sound that was more amused than harsh. "Coleman, you worry too much. Life doesn't wait for people to calm down. But sometimes you have to act, even when everyone else is watching or gossiping." He clapped Coleman lightly on the shoulder. "I promise you have nothing to fear. Trust me." Coleman left reluctantly, but the conversation left Henry thinking. He knew the town would never truly understand his work until it was revealed. He also knew that the warning, though well-meaning, was a challenge he had to meet. It was as if the very caution from others made him more determined. The project had already consumed his days, and now, even more, he felt the need to complete it. That evening, as the sun began to set, Henry walked to the grove with a new sense of purpose. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and the soft hum of insects settling in for the night. The grove, hidden from prying eyes, had become a secret kingdom, and Henry moved through it with confidence. The project, which had once been only sketches and small beginnings, was now growing into something substantial. The structure, large, intricate, and unlike anything the town had ever seen, took shape under his hands. The tools he used were simple, but his work was precise. He measured every line, adjusted every angle, and stepped back often to consider the view as a whole. Each movement was careful, deliberate, and thoughtful. At times he would pause, letting the sounds of the grove guide his thoughts. The birds chirped, the wind whispered through the leaves, and the stream's water rippled softly over the stones. All of it seemed to encourage him, as if the grove itself was alive, supporting the creation taking form within it. Yet, despite the peace of the grove, the tension outside continued to grow. Rumors in the town spread like wildfire. Children dared each other to get closer to the fence to catch a glimpse. Some claimed to have seen shadows that moved in impossible ways. Others swore they heard metallic sounds echoing across the fields at night. The story of Henry's secret project became a favorite topic at the diner, the grocery store, and even the Sunday church service. One night, a group of townsfolk decided they could no longer contain their curiosity. They crept toward the ranch, trying to stay hidden in the dark. Their hearts pounded with excitement and fear. They whispered to each other, pointing toward where the trees blocked the grove from view. But Henry, who knew every inch of his land, had anticipated such attempts. Shadows from the trees fell just so, hiding the shapes of his work. The clever placement of tarps, boards, and natural obstacles ensured that no one could see the full picture. The townspeople retreated, frustrated, but even more intrigued. Meanwhile, Henry worked tirelessly. Night after night he pushed forward, driven by a mix of excitement, stubbornness, and pride. He knew that once the project was revealed, it would amaze some and shock others. Perhaps a few would even laugh at it. But he had long accepted that possibility. What mattered to him was the act of creation itself, the challenge of doing something extraordinary in the quiet corners of the world. Henry's routine became almost ritualistic. He would wake before dawn, eat a simple breakfast, and check his notes. Sometimes he would make small sketches, adjusting designs or adding ideas he thought of during the night. Then he would gather his tools and supplies, moving carefully to the grove.
The hours would pass in a rhythm of focused work, measured movements, and quiet contemplation.
By the time the sun began to dip behind the hills, he would stop, clean his tools, and walk back to the house, leaving the project safely covered until the next day. The secrecy of the project gave Henry a sense of thrill. He understood the power of curiosity and how it could drive people to imagine things that might not even exist. Every flicker of a light, every unusual sound, every shadow in the night added to the story the town was telling itself. And he allowed it, letting the rumors grow, knowing that the eventual reveal would have a far greater impact because of the anticipation. But not everyone was enchanted by the mystery. Some townspeople were genuinely worried. Mrs. Thompson, for example, stayed up some nights, listening to distant noises, worrying that something might go wrong.
Mr. Parker! The school teacher debated whether he should warn the children to stay away from the ranch.
The fear of the unknown, combined with the town's close-knit nature, made the project feel more significant than it really was. Henry, of course, knew there was nothing to fear. Bet. His work was careful, his plans meticulous, and his respect for the land absolute. Henry also found moments of reflection during this time. He thought about why people feared what they did not understand. He realized that much of the town's anxiety came from their own limitations, from being comfortable with predictability. He, on the other hand, felt alive because he dared to go beyond the ordinary. Each piece of the project was a statement, not one of rebellion exactly, but one of personal courage and creative determination. Occasionally, Henry would hear the faint sound of someone approaching and would pause, listening carefully. The ranch was silent, except for natural noises, yet his instincts remained alert. He would sometimes catch glimpses of shadows moving through the trees, though they were always too far to reveal themselves fully.
He understood that the town's curiosity would only grow, and he allowed it to, knowing that anticipation added a special flavor to the eventual reveal.
One late evening, while working by the light of a lantern, Henry paused to look at the sky. The stars were clear, scattered like diamonds across the dark velvet above. He felt a sense of peace that contrasted sharply with the growing tension in the town. Up here, in his grove, no one could see him, no one could judge him, and nothing could stop him from following his vision. He felt connected to something larger than himself, a quiet, almost sacred sense of purpose. The following weeks were filled with careful labor and small adjustments. The structure grew taller and more complex. Each part had to be precise, yet flexible, reflecting Henry's creativity and ingenuity. The project became a puzzle, a challenge that demanded both patience and boldness. And though he often worked alone, Henry felt the energy of the town's curiosity surrounding him. It was as if the collective imagination of the people fueled his determination. By the end of the season, the project was nearly complete. But, though still hidden, it was impossible to ignore its presence entirely. Large shapes shifted with the wind, and unusual sounds echoed faintly across the fields. The townspeople could sense something extraordinary, even if they could not see it directly. Their curiosity had reached a fever pitch. Children dared each other to peek through gaps. Adults whispered behind hands, and everyone had their own theories. Some thought Henry had built a strange machine, others a massive sculpture, and a few imagined things that were completely impossible. Henry, however, remained calm. He knew that the town's guesses, no matter how wild, would never match the reality. And he also knew that the moment of revelation would change everything. Perhaps the town, perhaps even himself. He smiled quietly to himself as he covered the final pieces of the project, ensuring that it remained hidden until the right time. In the solitude of his grove, Henry felt proud. He had defied expectations, ignored warnings, and continued his work despite the doubts and fears of those around him. That night, as he sat on the porch of his small farmhouse, the wind rustling the leaves in the grove, Henry allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The project was nearly complete. The mystery had grown to its peak, and soon the town would see the results.
He thought about the warning from Coleman. Don't.
Someone might see. And he chuckled softly. He had seen, he had risked, and he had done it anyway. And he knew, deep in his heart, that the story was far from over. The day finally came when Henry Lawson knew it was time. The project he had been working on for months was nearly complete, hidden away in the grove that no one in the town had ever truly seen. He had spent countless hours measuring, building, and perfecting every detail. Each part had its purpose, each line had its place, and now it stood before him, tall and impressive, yet still cloaked by the trees and shadows. Henry paused for a moment, letting the sun fall on it in just the right way. The light highlighted every curve, every angle, and every carefully designed feature. It was beautiful, unlike anything the town had ever imagined, and he knew that revealing it would change everything.
Henry had planned the reveal carefully.
Fast. He wanted it to be seen by everyone at once, not piecemeal or by accident. He sent word to the town that there would be an announcement, though he gave no details. Curiosity immediately took hold. People began to speculate endlessly.
Is it a new building? Someone asked. A statue?
Maybe even some kind of invention?
Another replied, "It could be dangerous. What if it falls apart?" The guesses were wild, but that only made the excitement grow. When the day of the reveal arrived, Henry woke early, feeling both nervous and exhilarated. He dressed simply, as always, and walked to the grove to make final adjustments. A few last touches were needed to ensure the project looked perfect. He checked the alignment of the main structure, brushed away stray leaves, and made sure that nothing would accidentally hide the view. Every movement was careful and deliberate, the product of months of planning and labor. The grove, normally quiet and hidden, now felt like a stage ready for its audience.
By mid-morning, townspeople began to gather near the edge of Henry's property. Families walked slowly down the dirt road. Curious neighbors peeked over fences, and even the children, who had spent weeks daring each other to see the project, were buzzing with excitement. Everyone could sense that something extraordinary was about to happen. There was a mix of anticipation, fear, and excitement in the air.
Why is the guy in Calla so guy that is district in the subject?
Bess. Some whispered to each other, trying to guess what they were about to see, while others simply stood in silence, not wanting to miss a single moment. Henry finally stepped forward. He had chosen the spot where the largest number of people could see, though the grove itself still hid parts of the project from direct view.
He cleared his throat and called out, "Everyone, thank you for coming."
I know you've been curious and perhaps worried. Today you will see what I had been working on.
I ask you to watch with an open mind, for this is something very important to me. His voice, calm and steady, carried across the field. The crowd fell silent, all eyes fixed on him. Then, with careful hands, Henry removed the final coverings, revealing the full project. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. The structure was enormous, intricate, and completely unlike anything they had ever imagined. It was a creation that combined imagination, skill, and determination. Some people were awestruck, their mouths open in surprise. Others took a step back, unsure whether to laugh, cheer, or even protest. Children clapped in delight, while adults whispered to each other, trying to describe what they were seeing. The reaction was immediate and intense. Mrs. Thompson, who had worried so much about Henry's secrecy, stood frozen, her hand over her mouth.
"It's beautiful," she said finally, almost in disbelief. "Mr. Obama's bear." Parker, the school teacher, shook his head slowly. "I never would have thought he did this all by himself." Several neighbors nodded, equally stunned. The structure seemed to defy ordinary expectations. It was precise yet imaginative, practical yet whimsical. It was a blend of artistry and engineering that left everyone speechless. As people approached closer, they noticed the details. Every line, every curve, every small feature had been carefully planned and executed. It was clear that Henry had poured his heart and soul into the work. Some admired the craftsmanship, others were amazed by the creativity, and a few could barely believe that one man could accomplish something so impressive. Even the skeptics who had whispered doubts for months could not deny the skill and dedication that had gone into the project. Henry watched the reactions quietly, feeling a mix of pride and relief. He knew that the reveal would shock the town, but he had not anticipated just how strong the reactions would be. People began to talk loudly, pointing out parts they admired or found unusual. Best! Some argued over what it was supposed to represent, while others simply walked around, studying it from every angle. The atmosphere was electric, full of energy and amazement. Among the crowd, there were also a few negative reactions. Some people laughed nervously, unsure whether they should appreciate the creation or dismiss it. A few whispered criticisms, questioning why Henry had spent so much time on something so strange instead of doing more useful work. But these voices were in the minority. Most of the town was captivated by the sheer boldness of what Henry had accomplished. The mix of awe and disbelief created a sense of excitement that had not been felt in the town for years. Children were perhaps the most enthusiastic. They ran around the structure pointing out shapes and patterns, inventing stories about what it could do or represent. Their laughter and excitement spread through the crowd, reminding everyone of the joy of imagination and discovery. Even the adults could not help but smile at their energy. For a moment, the town forgot about gossip, fear, and judgment.
All that mattered was the incredible thing standing before them, the result of one man's vision and determination. Henry took a deep breath and addressed the crowd again. I know this may seem strange or unexpected. It may even confuse some of you. But I built this because I had to. It was something I could not ignore, something that was important to me. I hope it can inspire you to think beyond what is ordinary, to follow your own passions, even when others might not understand. His words were simple, but powerful, and they resonated with the people listening. Bah. Slowly, people began to appreciate the meaning behind the creation. It was not just a structure or a machine. It was a symbol of courage, creativity, and individuality. Henry had taken a risk, defied expectations, and stayed true to himself despite warnings and curiosity from others. In revealing it, he had challenged the town to reconsider what was possible when someone dared to dream and act on that dream. The crowd's initial shock began to give way to admiration. Neighbors who had doubted him earlier now nodded in respect. Some even approached Henry to shake his hand, thanking him for showing them something extraordinary. I never imagined anything like this could exist here, said Mr. Small. Parker, still amazed. You've opened our eyes, Henry. Children continued to laugh and explore, their imaginations sparked by the unusual design. The town was no longer just curious. They were inspired. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grove, Henry looked at his creation one last time. The structure gleamed in the warm light, and the town's reactions made him realize just how much his determination had mattered. It was a reminder that following one's instincts, even in the face of doubt or judgment, could lead to something remarkable. He had taken the warning. Don't! Someone might see! And turned it into a moment of triumph, not fear.
Even those who had initially laughed or questioned his judgment could not deny the impact. Conversations shifted from doubt to excitement.
People discussed the techniques Henry had used, speculated on his thought process, and debated what the project might inspire next. The town had been united in curiosity before, but now it was united in admiration and amazement. Henry's courage had created not only a masterpiece, but also a shared experience that the community would remember for years to come.
By nightfall, the crowd had slowly dispersed, but the energy lingered in the air.
People returned to their homes, still talking about what they had seen. The story of Henry Lawson and his secret project would be retold countless times. How he ignored warnings, worked in secrecy, and revealed something extraordinary. And while some may have been shocked, most felt a renewed sense of wonder and possibility. Henry, meanwhile, returned to his house, tired but satisfied. He sat on his porch, listening to the distant sounds of the town settling for the night. The stars were beginning to twinkle above, just as they had so many nights before, when he had worked quietly in the grove, but tonight felt different. The grove was no longer just his secret. It was a part of the town story now, a reminder that courage, creativity, and persistence could create something that inspired many, even in the smallest of places. He allowed himself a quiet smile. The reveal had gone exactly as he had hoped. People had seen and they had understood, at least in part, the effort and heart that had gone into the project. The whispers, the curiosity, the doubts, they had all served to make this moment even more powerful. And as he looked up at the night sky, Henry knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more ideas, more creations, more dreams to bring to life. But for now, the town had witnessed the result of one man's determination, and it had left them amazed, bewildered, and most importantly, inspired. The days after Henry Lawson's big reveal were filled with energy and discussion throughout the town. Everywhere people went, the conversation returned to his project. At the diner, neighbors debated the cleverness of the design and speculated about what Henry had been thinking while building it. In the schoolyard, children reenacted scenes from the reveal, laughing as they imagined themselves as explorers discovering the hidden grove.
Even the adults who had once doubted him found themselves admiring the courage and dedication it had taken to accomplish such a feat.
Henry, for his part, returned to his quiet life at the ranch. He continued his morning routine of waking early, eating a simple breakfast, and walking through his fields. But the atmosphere had changed. Now, he was no longer just the solitary rancher on the outskirts of town. He was the man who had dared to do something remarkable, and the town had noticed. People began waving when they saw him in the mornings, offering genuine smiles and nods of respect. Some even stopped to ask questions about the project, curious about his methods and thought process. Henry answered politely, but never revealed everything. Some things he believed were meant to remain a little mysterious. The townspeople's reactions were varied.
Annie felt inspired, as though Henry's courage had reminded them of their own dreams that they had set aside. Mrs. Ed
Bay Thompson, who had once worried endlessly about what he was doing, now smiled every time she passed the ranch. "If he can do something like that," she said to a friend, "maybe we can try a little more in our own lives." Children spoke of future adventures, projects, and ideas they wanted to try.
Even the skeptics found themselves reconsidering what was possible when someone followed their instincts. But the story of Henry Lawson's project also sparked debate.
Some questioned the purpose of such an unusual creation. A few townspeople wondered if it had been a waste of time or resources. They argued about practicality and tradition, expressing that life was simpler when things stayed ordinary. Henry listened quietly to these discussions, understanding that not everyone would see things the same way he did. But he had expected this. The purpose of his work was never to please everyone. It was to inspire curiosity, imagination, and a sense of possibility. Slowly, however, even the skeptics began to recognize something remarkable. The way Henry had planned and executed the project showed dedication, intelligence, and skill. The structure, while unique, was stable, well-built, and visually impressive. It became a symbol not just of Henry's creativity, but also of what one person could accomplish with patience and determination. People started to refer to it in their conversations as the Lawson creation, acknowledging the effort and care behind it, even if they didn't fully understand it. The project also became a point of pride for the town. Visitors from nearby communities began to hear about it, coming to see what the fuss was about. Children took their families on walks to the edge of the ranch to catch a glimpse, and local news even mentioned it as an example of imagination and courage in a small town. Henry, true to his nature, did not seek fame or recognition. He remained focused on his own life, quietly tending his fields and caring for his animals. But he could not help but feel satisfied knowing that his work had touched people's hearts and minds. One afternoon, as Henry sat by the stream in the grove, he reflected on what had happened. The months of secrecy, the long hours of labor, and the careful planning had all led to this moment. He thought about the warnings from his neighbor, the curiosity of the children, and the whispers of the adults. "Don't hike. Someone might see," they had said. And yet, seeing the reactions of the town now, Henry knew he had done the right thing. He had taken a risk, followed his instincts, and created something extraordinary. The world had seen it, and for once, curiosity had turned into admiration.
Henry also reflected on what this meant for the future. He realized that one act of courage could have a ripple effect.
The children who had watched in awe might grow up thinking that boldness and imagination were valuable. Adults might be encouraged to try new ideas or pursue long-forgotten dreams. And the town itself, once cautious and conventional, had experienced something unusual and inspiring. Even small towns could witness greatness, he thought, if someone was willing to take the first step. The impact of the project extended beyond admiration. It also created a sense of community. People who had previously ignored each other began to talk about shared experiences, inspired by Henry's work. Families walked together to the grove, neighbors discussed the project over coffee, and children played games imagining adventures connected to the creation. For the first time in many years, the town felt a sense of excitement and unity that went beyond ordinary daily routines. Henry had sparked something more than curiosity. He had sparked imagination, conversation, and connection. Henry, despite the attention, remained humble. He continued to tend his fields, repair fences, and care for his animals. He spoke to townspeople when they approached him, answered questions politely, and even shared small tips about his work. Yet he never boasted about the creation or sought personal recognition. The joy of creating, the satisfaction of completing something meaningful, and the knowledge that he had inspired others were enough. For Henry, the project had always been about passion and perseverance, not fame. Over time, the project also began to influence younger generations. Local children, inspired by Henry's courage and skill, started their own small projects. Some built miniature models of the creation, others tried their hands at inventing things with wood and metal. Teachers at the school noticed a change in students' attitudes toward creativity, encouraging more art, science, and exploration in lessons. Henry's work had planted a seed, and the town was beginning to see the growth. Even the adults were influenced in small ways. Some tried new hobbies, started small home projects, or simply allowed themselves to think differently about the world. The caution that had defined the town began to soften, replaced by curiosity and openness. People began to appreciate the value of pursuing something unusual or ambitious, even when it seemed risky. Henry's quiet courage had become a model, demonstrating that it was possible to take a risk and create something meaningful, even when others doubted or warned against it. Months passed, and the town settled into a new rhythm. The Lawson creation remained a source of pride, a landmark of inspiration for visitors and locals alike. Children continued to play nearby, their laughter mingling with the wind through the trees. Adults still discussed the project, often reflecting on what it meant for creativity, courage, and individuality. And Henry, though still living his quiet life, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The secrecy, the hard work, the risks, all of it had been worth it. Henry also continued to create, though more quietly. He began small projects within the grove, each one an experiment in skill and imagination. Though none were as large as the first, they still carried the same spirit of determination and creativity. He had learned that the act of creating was itself a reward, and that sharing even a small part of it could inspire others. The town, now familiar with his habits, watched with mild curiosity, no longer surprised when he carried tools or materials to the grove.
They had learned that Henry Lawson's work, while unusual, was always meaningful.
As the years went on, the story of Henry Lawson and his creation became part of the town's identity. Parents told the tale to their children, emphasizing the importance of following one's passion, of working hard, and of being courageous in the face of doubt. The creation itself remained a landmark, carefully maintained by Henry and occasionally visited by curious townspeople. Its presence was a constant reminder that extraordinary things could happen anywhere, even in a small, quiet town. Henry, now older and wiser, often reflected on the journey. He remembered the warnings, "Don't, someone might see," and smiled. Those words, meant to deter him, had only strengthened his resolve. He realized that fear of judgment was one of the biggest obstacles to creativity, and overcoming it had allowed him to achieve something remarkable. He hoped that the town, and anyone who learned of the story, would take that lesson to heart. Courage, patience, and persistence could turn a dream into reality. In the evenings, Henry still sat on his porch, watching the sunset over the hills and the grove. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint sounds of children playing and adults chatting. It was a peaceful, contented scene, yet one full of life and possibility. Henry felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that his actions had changed the town, even in small ways. Despair. He had taken a risk, defied expectations, and created something meaningful. And in doing so, he had left a legacy of inspiration that would last long after the project itself. Finally, as the stars appeared in the night sky, Henry allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought about the months of secrecy, the long hours, the warnings, and the excitement of the reveal. Despair. He understood that life was often full of challenges and doubts, but also full of opportunities to create and inspire. And though he lived quietly, far from the center of town life, he had proven that one person's vision could touch many lives, spark imagination, and leave a lasting mark. Henry Lawson's story became more than a tale of a secret project. It became a story of courage, creativity, and determination. It reminded everyone in the town, and anyone who heard it later, that even in the most ordinary places, extraordinary things could happen. And as long as someone was willing to dream, to work, and to share even a part of that dream, the world could be changed, one creation at a time.